Zeitlin from the University of Amsterdam and the Schumann Center at the European University Institute. I'm co-chairing this monthly seminar on behalf of the steering committee of the ECPR Standing Group on the European Union. Normally, Nathalie Braak from the Free University in Brussels is also co-chairing. She's just recovering from a small operation today, so she's not with us, but she will be chairing the next seminar on the 17th of November. It's nice to see a good turnout for this seminar with a number of familiar colleagues and also some new faces. So that's great. It's a very topical subject, national governments and the enforcement of rule of law in the EU. If you are following what's going on with access to EU cohesion and recovery funding for Hungary and Poland, that matters are really coming to a crux, at least with those countries. And so we're very happy to have this joint paper co-authored by Carlos Closa and Gisela Hernandez. I should say, so Gisela is going to present the paper. She's a PhD candidate working on exactly this topic at the Institute of Public Goods and Policies and the Autonomous University in Madrid. She's published, among other places, in Politics and Governance and the Hague Journal on the rule of law. We had hoped to have Carlos Closa with us, but he has now become vice president of the Spanish National Research Council, and that is apparently keeping his schedule very full. I think he probably needs no introduction to this audience as somebody who has contributed very widely at the intersection between EU politics, law, governance, and constitutionalism. Until very recently, he was also the co-editor of the European Political Science Review, also published by ECPR. And we're very happy to have as our discussant Daniel Norin, who is professor of political science and director of the Arena Center for European Studies at the University of Oslo, and is also affiliated with the Department of Political Science in Gothenburg. He's been working broadly on issues of judicial decision-making in the Court of Justice of the EU and other courts, on coalition building and the impact of gender in negotiations in the Council of the EU, and the link between lobbying and political opinion in Europe. And the format is that Gisela will present her paper for 30 to maximum 40 minutes. Then Daniel will comment for up to 10 minutes, and perhaps I'll give Gisela first opportunity to respond, maybe throw in a comment of my own, and then we'll open up to you, the audience, and you can raise your hand if you would like to speak. If for some reason you can't take the Zoom floor directly, you can also post questions in the chat, which I can read out for Gisela. So Gisela, you have the floor. Let's get started.
Okay, so thank you very much, everyone, and particularly the organizers of this seminar series. And also thank you very much, Daniel, for agreeing to be the discussion of our paper today. I'm very sorry that Carlos cannot be here today with us, but its agenda is being very complicated these days. I'm Gisela Hernandez, and as Jonathan said, I'm doing my PhD thesis at the Spanish National Research Council at the Institute of Public Goods and Policies. And the paper we're going to present today, it's entitled National Governments and Enforcement of Rule of Law in the EU. It's a co-author paper, and this is a brief index of the points I'm going to touch today. But in order to go directly to it, as a way of a brief introduction, we all here are very well aware that the European Union is living a very serious rule of law crisis. The governments of Poland and Hungary are systematically violating the fundamental values contained in Article 2 of the treaty. One of the explanations why the Union is not being able to bring these governments back to compliance is because it lacks effective, strong enforcement mechanisms. Article 7, which is the provision of the treaty, which is supposed to protect the fundamental values, is impossible to use, particularly the second part, which permits to sanction the offenders due to the unanimity requirement. The literature on the failure of Article 7 procedures has concentrated very much on the weaknesses of the procedure itself, and has particularly paid attention to the wide margin that the Council enjoys to set the procedure, the rules of the hearings, and so on, but not so much attention has been paid to national governments' preferences regarding the rule of law enforcement. There has been some attempts to map out the positions of national governments in the Council in this regard, but these classifications present two weaknesses. The first one is that they often take as the units of analysis the member states and not the national governments, and this is problematic because they are not taking into account that if the government changes, the ideological scene, the preferences regarding EU integration and so on may also change, and this government in a member state may present a different position. And secondly, these classifications are very good at identifying extreme cases, the strong anti-rule of law enforcement governments and a strong pro-rule of law enforcement member state, but they also fail to classify these governments, these member states that fail into a broad spectrum of undefined positions, these ones that are in the middle of the axis, which we don't know very well whether they are pro or anti-rule of law enforcement. So we aim to contribute to this literature firstly by providing a comprehensive classification of all national governments from 2016 to 2021 into 4 categories, which are committed pro-rule of law enforcers, soft pro-rule of law enforcers, reluctant anti-rule of law enforcers, and finally strong anti-rule of law enforcers. Then we want to examine the factors explaining that each government fails into one of these categories, why some governments are pro and why some other governments are anti-rule of law enforcement. And finally, we want to contribute to the study of preferences in the Council, preferences of voting in the Council of the EU, by using a methodological approach that has not been very often used in this particular field, which is QCA. We have chosen to do a qualitative study, and particularly this methodology, due to 2 reasons. The first one is that often the study of preferences is approached through quantitative methods, and we wanted here to provide a different point of view. Secondly, because we wanted to take into account not only the factors in isolation, but also the combinations and configurations of factors that permits us to explain the preferences. And finally, also because the number of units of analysis that we had was not very strong to do a quantitative approach. So we thought that a qualitative one would fit it better. So the theoretical explanations for...
One second, just in case anyone is not familiar with the acronym QCA, it stands for Qualitative Comparative Analysis. And I think Gisela will explain how she's using it in the course of the presentation. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, thank you, Jonathan. Okay, so for the theoretical explanations of the failure of the Council in using Article 7, there has been 2 main arguments. The first one would be the tactical argument, or the idea that the perception of the existence of a blocking minority in the Council decreases the pressure of some governments to take a stance in this rule of law enforcement issue. So that's why we would find a broad spectrum, a broad number of national governments which fail into this oscillator or not very well-defined category of preferences regarding the rule of law enforcement issue. And the second argument would be the existence of a bandwagon effect, sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong, towards the perceived winning position, which in this case would be to vote against enforcement. This is, if we perceive that the voting is going to take place and it's not going to succeed because Poland and Hungary are protecting each other, we prefer to align with the winning option, which would be against enforcement. This is consistent with how the Council works, because indeed it often works by consensus and voting very rarely takes place, and this is one of the reasons why probably the Council has never voted on whether to apply the recommendations contained in Article 7, Part 1, which do not require unanimity, but rather a 4/5 majority only. So consensus or lack of it in the Council is the result of national governments' preferences, and we consider that it is important to study national governments' preferences, particularly for the rule of law case, because the literature has demonstrated that voting preferences are very issue dependent. It means that depending on the alliances of member states in the Council change very much depending on the issue in which we are going to vote. So we have found that this is a particularly relevant case in the actual context, of course, but also to contribute to this literature on different factors explaining different preferences depending on the topic. So here we have our theoretical factors that we think that may influence to be against or in favor of rule of law enforcement. The ones in bold letters are the ones that we have considered for our analysis, but I have also included the ones we have discarded because I think it is important for you to understand why we have discarded these factors, these conditions. We have classified the conditions in 3 categories, which are first of all, the structural conditions, which are the ones that are not dependent on the national governments, but rather depend on the member state and are unchangeable. The first condition we consider was size, because the literature has argued that big member states have often more power to direct the voting preferences of the rest of member states. But this is not very relevant, we think, in the rule of law case, because the voting rules, 4/5 majority or unanimity, imply that each member state has a vote. So here size does not determine very much your voting and veto capacities, because all the member states have the same weight in voting. And also because there are several medium-sized and small-sized member states in the European Union that are among the best democratic performers. So as for example, in the Latin American case, it is true that the big member states are also the more stable ones and so on. This is not applicable for the case of the European Union. So we have decided not to take into account this condition. The second one would be geography, and very often this cleavage has been taken as very relevant to explain anti and pro rule of law enforcement positions. We often argue that the Eastern member states are the anti-rule of law enforcers, while the Western member states are the pro-rule of law enforcers. We find this very deterministic, and also it's not taking into account that there are the differences, for example, between the North member states, the South member states, the group of the Baltics, and so on. So it's not it does not take into account a lot of complexity, and also it does not explain variances in the same region, because actually the literature has argued that in the Eastern and in the Western, within the Eastern and the Western member states, there are differences. Finally, we have taken into account membership duration. We have classified the member states into old and new, depending on whether they acceded the Union before or after 2004 enlargement, And the literature says that this cleavage is relevant because it sometimes implies different understandings of what is Europe for, not necessarily to be against European integration, but a different understanding of integration. Also because the literature says that new member states tend to favor policies that preserve more national autonomy and national diversity. That also that while in the past all member states were more often the ones that more often vote against in the council, this tendency is reverting, and now the new member states are more likely to register opposition. And finally, because in the rule of law case in particular, some authors have identified that the the agenda is driven by the EU 15, so the old member states. Then semi-structural conditions are the ones that are relatively unchanged through long periods of time. They can change, but normally they remain stable even though governments change. So first of all, we think about considering interdependence, measured as trade linkages, but we found that Hungary and Poland were not really very important partners of very export partners of very much of a lot of member states, sorry, and indeed also that they were important exporting partners of some of the most pro-rule of law enforcement member states. So we didn't find this explanation very convincing for our particular issue. And then we took into account budgetary position, which was included in analysis, which means whether you are a net recipient or a net contributor to the EU budget. And the literature says that this condition is relevant because sometimes it relates with different integration preferences. Also because contributors would often prefer the EU to apply more monitoring, more surveillance, and more discipline, while the debtors or the net recipients would prefer the union to be not so a monitoring authority and not to commit themselves very much with rules. So this has to do with your perception of yourself. If you perceive that you are probably a target of enforcement, you would probably not be very much in favor of enforcement. So in general terms, so we have considered this condition. And finally, we have the circumstantial conditions, which are the ones that depend particularly of the government of that moment. These are, first of all, ideological sympathy for the offending member states, and we have measured it in terms of partisanship, whether you belong to the same European Parliament family that the offender member states, which are in this case the ECR and the EPP. And this is relevant because we often have observed, the literature has observed that there are strong alliances in the European Parliament that often affect also how the governments behave in the Council and the European Council, although this condition has never been tested in the rule of law case in the Council. And finally, ideology in terms of ideological position in the Galtan axis, whether you have a preference for traditional and authoritarian values or a preference for libertarian and post-materialist values. Then we have taken into account democratic quality. And here we have two arguments. The first one would be autocracy's reciprocal protection of each other. This means in order to survive, autocratic regimes often promote autocracy in their environment and also engage in pragmatic collaborations. And secondly, low quality democracies are less prepared to sanction others because they fear that they would be sanctioned in the future. And finally, we have the EU integration stance, which means whether you are pro or against more European integration. And in this sense, a government with a low level of a government with a preference, with an opposition to EU integration would prefer the union not to gain powers in the rule of law enforcement case because it would fear a spillover effect and to increase the powers of the union in general. So these are the conditions we have taken into account for the analysis. And here you can find our theoretical expectations. Basically, what you can see is like ideal types, what would be a perfect rule of law enforcement according to our theoretical expectation, and what would be a perfect anti-rule of law enforcement government. A pro-rule of law enforcement is expected to be in an old member state, to be a contributor to the EU budget, to belong to a different EP family than the offender member states, to be closer to the GAL axis, ideological axis, to present high levels of compliance with democratic values, good levels of democratic quality, and finally to be in favor of higher levels of European integration. While on the other hand, an anti-rule of law enforcer is expected to be located in a new member state, to be a debtor or a net recipient of EU budget, to belong to the ECR or the EPP groups in the European Parliament, to be located near to the tan end of the ideological axis, to present not very good levels of democratic quality, and finally to be neutral or opposed to higher levels of European integration. So we have mapped out all the national governments from 2016 to 2021 and try to find evidence for all of them. We have mapped out 92 governments, but only found evidence from 62. So these are the ones that we have taken into account for our analysis because it has been impossible to find evidence for all of them, and this we are aware that is a weakness of our work. As for the evidence, we have used the data containing official documents, speeches of the government, declarations and actions, for example, the questions they have put in the Article 7 hearings, and attending to some indicators that I have not included in the presentation because they were too long. We have classified into the 4 categories I mentioned before. The committed for rule of law enforcement ones are the ones that have been very vocal and very advocating for a stronger role of the union in the rule of law enforcement issue, and they have taken the lead in this regard. They have proposed new mechanisms, moved them forward, and so on. Then the soft rule of law enforcement governments would be those ones that have displayed a preference for the union to enforce the fundamental values, but often have followed the path of the leading governments. Then the reluctant anti-rule of law enforcement ones would be the ones that display a preference for the union not to use their powers in enforcing the rule of law, but they have sometimes expressed criticism towards the union. They have sometimes expressed support for Poland and Hungary, but not in a very confrontational way. And finally, the strong anti-rule of law enforcement governments would be the ones that have been very confrontational against the European Union, against the Commission, and the other institutions using their powers, and also sometimes because they themselves were under surveillance and under and were disoffending member states. So here you can find the classification we have made, and which is very curious is that often pro-rule of law enforcement positions are stronger and more vocal than the anti-enforcement positions, which tend to be more nuanced or more reluctant, more discreet in a way. And for the conditions, here you can look at whether which indicators we have taken into account. For classifying the governments into new and old member states, of course, we have looked at the year of accession, before 2004 or after 2004. For contributors and beneficiaries of EU budget, we have used Commission data, and we have subtract the total expenditure from the own resources contribution, and this is a set variable. This means a binary variable. You can be a contributor or a beneficiary, but we have not taken into account the value of how much you contribute or not to the EU budget because it was very difficult to measure. Then we have, for ideological sympathy, we have taken into account party affiliation and also ideology by using the Galtan indicator of the Chapel Hill expert survey. We have taken the data from 2019 because it was the most recent one, and we are aware that this is a weakness that we don't have more recent data because our analysis extends to 2021, but it has impossible to use more updated data because it is not available. And also for EU integration stance, we have used the EU position indicator of the Chapel Hill expert survey. And finally, for democratic quality, we have taken into account the VDEM report, a liberal democracy index, for the latest year of each of the governments. As for the analysis, we have used qualitative comparative analysis for studying the direction of the preferences. As you can see in our classification, we have like two types of classification of the preferences. We have the directional one, whether you are an anti or a pro-rule of law enforcer, and then we have the degree of whether you are a strong or soft pro or anti-rule of law enforcement. So for directional preferences, we have used a qualitative comparative analysis by using the RStudio Cloud software. Qualitative comparative analysis is based on Boolean algebra, and it basically takes into account whether you are inside or outside a set understood as having the outcome of interest, which in our case is to be a pro-enforcer, or whether you are outside of this set, and also your belonging to each of the factors that we have taken into account. The interesting part of this type of analysis is that it does not only tell you whether a condition is relevant by itself in isolation, but also shows you configurations of conditions that permit to be a pro or anti-enforcer. As for necessity thresholds, we have put it the consistency on 0.9, which means that at least 90% of the cases with the outcome of interest should exhibit the necessary condition for us to take it as relevant. And also for the sufficiency, we have put the consistency on 0.75, which means that at least 75% of all the cases with the sufficient condition should exhibit the outcome of interest. These are thresholds that are agreed in the literature of QCA. And then for the conditions explaining the intensity of preferences, we could not use the QCA analysis because there were very strong differences because of committed and soft pro and anti-rule of law enforcers, so results were very skewed towards one of the two positions, and we have used a more qualitative approach by looking at the conditions that they have in common and explaining them with a more qualitative approach. Okay, so for the QCA results, I know that this may result difficult to read if you are not familiarized with these methods, but I'm going to try to explain them. First of all, we have found that in order to be a pro-enforcer, a necessary condition is to be a null member state. So it is very relevant, this structural factor for determining pro-enforcer attitude. On the other hand, we have found swing conditions, which are like functional equivalents that are necessary for the outcome of interest. And in this sense, the swing conditions that we have found that can be theoretically explained is to be a contributor or to be a government with good democratic quality as a necessary configuration to be a pro-enforcer. Why? Because we have interpreted that to be a contributor or to be a government with a member state with good democratic quality levels can be interpreted as to be a stable member state within the European Union environment, and this probably would make you to be in favor of stronger surveillance on the part of the European Union to the rest of the governments. As for the sufficiency terms, we have found two very interesting things. The first one is that it is sufficient for being a pro-enforcer to be a null member state, a contributor, and a pro-European Union government. And this fits well with which the literature predicts, because it relates whether you are a contributor or a recipient with your integrationist preferences. So those member states which are contributors are often more present governments which are pro-EU integration. And the second configuration that that is sufficient for a government to be in favor of the rule of law enforcement is to be in an old member state, but it has more to do with the ideological factor, not to belong to the same party as the offenders, not to present than ideological attitudes, to have good levels of democracy, and to be a pro-rule of law, a pro-EU integration government. And these are the two sufficient configurations to be an enforcer. You can see it more clearly here in the plots. As for the necessity, all the member states that present the necessary condition are in the left up side of the graphic, while we have some deviant cases, which are Austria 3, which I will explain later why this is a deviant cases, and the UK governments, which are deviant because often they presented very strong TAN attitudes and very anti-EU integration attitudes. And for sufficiency, you can see all the governments that belong to the sufficient term in the up right side of the graphic. And we have some deviant cases. These are Greece and Greece 2, Greece 1, and Finland. They are not covered by the sufficient solution because all of them presented higher TAN attitudes that we expected for the sufficient term. And also we have one deviant consistency in kind case, which is that is not is covered by the solution, but does not present the outcome of interest. It is not a pro-enforcer, which is Austria 3. And this case, as I said, is going to be explained later. As for the anti-enforcer governments, we have found that there is no single necessary condition for explaining anti-enforcement attitudes, and there is no theoretically robust explanation for the combination of necessary conditions of swing conditions, because we have found that the swing conditions are to be in a new member states, to be in the same EP party as the offenders, and to be a town government, but we have not found a very theoretical sound explanation for this combination to be functional for these three terms to be functional equivalence. So we have discarded this explanation. And as for the sufficiency, we have found that those governments against the rule of law enforcement are, on the one hand, in new member states and recipients of EU budget. So this is consistent with the idea that you prefer not to be very much, you prefer the union not to monitor very much if you are the one that is going to be monitored. And second, we have found a relevance of the ideological explanation. If you're a government that belongs to the same party in the EP as the offenders, that has an attitude and is anti-European integration, and you have an anti-European integration stance, you are going to be an anti-enforcer. So here you can see the sufficiency graph. And we have also the deviant coverage cases of Italian. We have found that the explanation is in the case of Italy because it presented very Gal attitudes, because it was the government of Matteo Salvini, if I'm not wrong. And for Cyprus, the explanation was that it was a contributor of the EU, but I think that it was a contributor, but it was a quite strange case, so we need to look for it deeply in our following reviews of the paper, but we don't have deviant cases consistency in kind. And then for explaining the differences in degree, first, for the committed and soft pro rule of law enforcement, we have found that we have 30 pro rule of 21 committed pro enforcers and 9 soft pro enforcers. And the explanations for the soft enforcers may be, on the first hand, that they are more close to the ends of the ideological axis than the rest of the cases. So it may be the case that if you move towards extreme ideological positions, you are less favorable to enforcement. The second explanation may point toward lowest levels of democratic quality. And finally, an alternative explanation, which is not contemplated in our theoretical expectations, may be that these were the member states most affected by the 2008 crisis. So it may be that their sometimes negative experiences with fiscal surveillance have made them a little more cautious about enforcement in general in the Union. And second, for the reluctant and strong anti-enforcers, we have found only 5 strong anti-enforcers, which are, of course, the governments in Hungary and Poland. And these governments present a lot of common characteristics in terms of ideology. First of all, they are in the tan end of the ideological axis. They are very strong anti-rule of law, anti-European Union integration. And finally, they present very low values or very low democratic quality values, scores, sorry. So, as for the discussion of our results, we have found that structural factors are very, very important in explaining rule of law enforcement preferences, and particularly the time of accession. In this sense, time of accession is more relevant for explaining whether you are a pro-enforcer than for an anti-enforcer. And we think that this may be explained due to different understandings of what is Euro 4. And it may be that the more time you spend within the council, the more socialized you are with the rules of procedure and with the fundamental values of the European Union, and you are more committed to supranational enforcement and to the surveillance of the Union on your behavior as a member state. It does not mean necessarily that the new member states are not familiarized with the fundamental values, but that they have a different understanding of them. So then we have found that contributions to EU budget and democratic quality, as I said before, are probably functional equivalents of a higher concept would be to be a stable member state. And it is consistent with the literature says. If you perceive yourself as a stable enough government not to be sanctioned, you are going to be in favor of monitoring the rest of the governments if they may violate some of the provisions of the European Union. And circumstantial factors have shown to be more relevant in explaining the differences in degree rather than the differences in direction of the preferences. But they have also shown to be more relevant in the case of the anti-enforcers. So this is important because it helps to combat determinism. It does not mean that you necessarily, due to being a new member state, need to be an anti-enforcer. And it's only a sufficient condition if combined with the fact that you are also a recipient of the EU budget. So it means that it's not the determinism of being a new member state, but the fact that you fear that you are going to be monitored by the European Union in general. And finally, we have also found that as the structural factors, as the structural conditions are so important, there is a high level of path dependency along preferences. So this may explain why often the literature has approached this issue of rule of law enforcement preferences from the perspective of the member states rather to focus on national governments. And this is also consistent with some authors said that changing preferences inherited from previous governments is sometimes too costly. Indeed, we have already found two exceptions at the because there has been variances in degree, but most national governments in the same member state directionally remain pro or anti-rule of law enforcement. The only exceptions are Austria. As I said, this is a Debian consistency case, but we think that this is because the first government of Sebastian Kurz had to deal with the migration crisis, and Austria and Hungary had very closely positions regarding immigration. So probably in this sense, Kurz would have preferred to let the rule of law issue in a second place in order to prioritize the cooperation regarding migration. And the other case would be Italy, as I said, the government of Matteo Salvini, which was quite a different government from the rest that we have taken into account in this analysis. And finally, as a way of concluding, national government preferences in the council are strongly issue dependent, but it is true that we observe some homophilia between governments to behave similarly to the ones that are more similar to them, but this homophilia takes more into account structural factors than circumstantial ones. Also, we have found that it is very important to take into account the configurations of preferences, and in this sense we advocate for the combination of qualitative and quantitative methods in order to approach government's preferences in the council, because we think this will provide a more complete picture than studying the factors in isolation. And finally, as we have against the rule of law enforcement and more than the positions in favor of enforcement, which are more vocal and strong, we argue that it may be possible that aspiracies take places in the anti-enforcers if they perceive that the rule of law enforcement issue gain preeminence in the agenda of the council, because they would use, following the tactical argument, this calculus of finally voting in favor of what they perceive would be the winning position, in this case, to sanction the errant governments. And finally, as I added here, this is work in progress. As for future steps, we want to pay more attention to and to explain better in the paper our Debian cases, which we have not had enough time to go into deep into these cases, and we think that they are particularly relevant. Also, we want to include a theory evaluation more complete within our QCA analysis, and also to test whether our results can be applied to the 30 governments that we have not been able to include in the analysis because of the fact that we have not found enough evidence. And in this sense, if you have suggestions on how can we do this, we would be very grateful, because we are finding some trouble in to try to infer our conclusions to these other 30 missing governments. So that's all of my part, and thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your comments and questions on the paper. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gisela. So if you can stop sharing your screen, and I give the floor over to Daniel for his comments. I mean, it may be that you'll be asked to show again some of the very complicated figures, but for now, let's work that way. So, Daniel.
All right. Thank you so much, Gisela, for the presentation and for giving me a chance to read your paper. I think this is very important work that you're doing to try to map out and explain the positions that are taken by member states in the Council on what is arguably an existential issue for the European Union. And I think you do a very good job in identifying and categorizing the most important factors that will be related to this position taking. And I think actually the mapping itself, as you showed in the table in the presentation, that's table 3 in the paper, is quite telling, right? It's there's not one single member state with a membership from post 2004 that has raised explicit critique against Hungary or Poland in this process. And while basically all the Northern Odin member states have done so. So the question is, of course, why we see this split. Geographical location, time of membership are not explanations in and of themselves. So we need to theorize what are the mechanisms behind this, and that's what you're trying to do. I have 3 main comments that I want to give to the paper and to the broader project, Gisela. I know you're writing a PhD on this project. First, on theory, I think there is definitely room for further specifying the logic that drives positions for or against tough enforcement of Article 2 values here. And I would put most emphasis on the kind of anticipation of future enforcement logic. So how tough actions against Poland and Hungary today may come back and haunt my member state in the future. I think, to me, that seems like a very plausible logic that may explain why some of these member states are cautious. So what type of precedent are we setting here? What is the risk that my governance institutions or my policies will be affected the next time, right? Could there be spillover effects to other areas where my record might be questioned by other member states? And I think this is a logic that can be theorized even further in this paper or in your larger PhD project that will take you closer to the key mechanisms that are likely to be at play here, in particular for the anti-enforcers. I also think there's room for more theorizing on the pro-enforcement side. So we can imagine that these countries are not too worried about future processes against themselves, but what else drives preferences in favor of enforcement? What do you win by actually pushing Poland and Hungary in the Council here? You may win the sense of doing the right thing from a democratic point of view. Is that important? Do you win domestic liberal votes? Is that what's driving this? Do you win perhaps a future better handling of EU funds? Or are you seeking to more generally protect the functioning of the common market, which requires reliable judiciaries, well-functioning governance institutions in all the member states. I mean, there are a couple of arguments here that seems reasonable, but to me, it's still quite unclear to what extent and under which conditions those mechanisms actually may mobilize governments to, expend bargaining resources in the council to really push for these issues. And the fact that we've seen little action from the council may indicate that these pro-enforcement mechanisms are not as strong as the anti-enforcement mechanisms. So I see more room for theorizing there. Empirically, I think the mapping of public statements that you've been doing is a great first step towards understanding member states' preferences here. But another crucial piece of the puzzle is how salient these preferences are and how far the member states are actually willing to push for in their preferred direction, right? We know that the council is a bargaining machine that is kind of programmed to transform conflicting preferences into agreements. And one common way of doing that is to try to create package deals where you kind of buy out each other across different issues. And a key substance of such package deals is differences in salience, right? So member states that feel less strongly about a certain issue may be willing to compromise on that issue in order to gain more at a different time. So I think maybe the distinction you make in the paper between soft and committed, I need to move in the room in order for the light not to go out here. The distinction between soft and hard or committed pro and anti-enforcers probably to some extent reflects differences in salience, but that surely there is more variation here that is still unknown, I would say, and that likely will determine the outcome. So, for example, in the mapping that you've done, both France and Germany come out as strong pro-enforcers. So, of course, France and Germany are member states that hold a lot of bargaining power in the council that could be used to bring over some of the more reluctant or softer anti-enforcers if France and Germany really thought that this was important, right? So I think here's an area where more research is needed to understand the weight of the preferences. You pointed the direction of the preferences, but salience is going to be really important here. And it also goes back to the previous point of kind of the logic behind strong pro-enforcement preferences. What would actually motivate France, Germany, Netherlands to go from making public statements to seriously push for a vote in the Article 7 procedure and to prioritize spending bargaining resources on getting it's 22 member states, I think, that are necessary to get a vote to declare a risk of a breach of Article 2 values here. That's where I would try to dig even deeper in this great project, Gisela. One final comment before I stop, which is on the question of whether election matters, or whether the driving factors are structural or semi-structural, as you say in the paper. So government shifts from center left to center right might not matter that much, and that's also what you see in the data, I think. But I would be really surprised if elections like those in Italy or in Sweden recently will not make a difference here. And I'll just tell you one anecdote I heard yesterday from a Sweden Democrat who was interviewed on Swedish radio. So the Sweden Democrats is the radical right-wing party that is now basically dictating the new Swedish government's policy. The new government has committed to anchoring all Swedish EU positions with the Sweden Democrats before they go to Brussels. And one of the first points that this guy raised was to question, why is it in the interest of Sweden to pick a fight with Hungary over the rule of law? So I'd be really interested to see what happens to the Swedish position on this issue. All right, I'm going to stop there.
Thank you. First, thanks to Gisela for the presentation, to Daniel for the comments. Let me just add a few comments. They're mostly on, the classification of countries and how you build your possible explanatory arguments. And so, one point concerns pro-integration attitude. So it's not as clear as you seem to be suggesting that we should expect those countries who are in favor of strong enforcement of the rule of law also to be pro-integration. So the Netherlands would be an obvious case in point, and in important respects also Nordic countries that up till now have been supporters of the rule of law. In neither case have these countries been in the forefront of demanding further integration. A second point concerns contributions to the EU budget, and here I didn't quite follow something that you said, I guess, about Cyprus, because I'm looking at a chart of net contributions to the EU budget by member states for 2018, and there it shows Cyprus as a net recipient, and indeed it shows that all new member states are net or were net recipients, and indeed the only old member states who were also net recipients would be those in Southern Europe: Portugal, Spain, Greece, and interestingly, kind of an outlier, I'm not exactly sure why, Belgium, which may have something to do with the location of the EU institutions there. So in that respect, there is quite a close, apart from the Southern European countries who also show up in your reluctant supporters of rule of law enforcement, the net contributors are almost identical with, net recipients are almost identical with old member states. And finally, you look at the contribution to the EU budget, but the broader questions of creditor and debtor states might be relevant. They overlap, but not entirely. And that might be linked to the point that Daniel was making about fear of enforcement. So given that the Southern European member states and also sometimes Ireland show up in your chart, broadly speaking, as less enthusiastic supporters of rule of law enforcement, the question is, is there a connection, for instance, to enforcement of the Stability and Growth Pact potentially, or are these really, two different things? It's not necessarily obvious that if you are a debtor country that might be in danger of falling into the excessive deficit procedure, that you would see rule of law action against Poland or Hungary as a dangerous precedent, although it could, of course, be the case. Daniel, I don't know if that's what you were trying to get at, but that's what I took from the observation. Okay, Gisela, why don't you take a first crack at responding to these comments, and then in the meantime, let me invite people who would like to ask comments to put your hands up, or if you won't be able to turn on your camera and ask your question directly, you can also start posting it in the chat. So, Gisela.
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for all your comments and your questions. I will try to address for theories. I agree, we have still to improve our explanation, but it is and something that is for that rule of that for the pro rule of law enforcers, sorry, I wanted to say. And in this sense, I agree with you, Daniel, that we are not very much of the actual mechanisms that push some governments to be so vocal in the rule of law enforcement issue. But the thing is that I'm not very sure whether we could introduce this complexity in the paper, because we may enter the situation in which we first have too many conditions for the QCA to actually work, and secondly, to have some conditions that only explain the differences in degree. So I think that we can have two options, like maybe to include more conditions in order to explain differences in degree in the theoretical part, like to say, okay, these ones are for the direction or these ones are for the degree, or to study. So I was saying that we need to think more about how to introduce this part of the paper in the paper, because I think also that it would be probably necessary to ask directly these national governments why they are so vocal. I'm not sure whether we have enough theoretical knowledge to predict these conditions, and this would require to. The second comment of Daniel was also very related with the salience of preferences. And as he was speaking, I was thinking about whether it would be necessary to expand our classification in degree and include more categories. I don't know whether you find this could solve the problem of the salience of preferences, because, for example, push and use their bargaining power in the council. So I think that a possible solution may be to expand our degree categories and to make them more complex, but I don't know whether this may add too much complexity to our.
You said something about adding too much complexity, and then we didn't hear anything further.
Yeah, okay, so I was saying that it may add too much complexity, but of course we will think about it and try to figure out how to manage to introduce this complexity in the actual state of the paper. And for the elections part, I very much agree with Daniel. The thing is that we have found that being a non-member state is a necessary condition for being a pro-enforcer, but I'm not very sure whether this would be the case if we added governments from 2021 onwards, because of what you said, what happened with the actual victory of Giorgia Meloni in Italy, or of the far right in taking part in the government in Sweden. And this, I think it's also reflected in the paper, but I think we need to theorize it more and to explain it better in the discussion of the results, because it is the case, for example, with the Debian cases, with the case of Austria, which I say that it was a moment in which the coalition government in Austria was also including the far right and also had very close migration stances with Hungary, and therefore Austria was not a pro-enforcer during this period of time. And also with the government of Matteo Salvini in Italy, it was Italy 2 case, I guess. So I think we need to reflect more this complexity in the paper, and also to explain that these all are new conditions are a proxy for something more complex, and that is not deterministic, that it does not mean that you necessarily, for being in a non-member state, are going to be a pro-enforcer forever, which is now, I think, reflected in the QCA analysis, but not so much in the discussion of the paper. So as for Jonathan comments, as for the classification, the points that you have made on the classification of the countries and the conditions that explain them, I agree with you that the pro-EU integration present some weaknesses, because actually what we have found is that some governments have strong pro-integration stances, but then they do not favor the rule of law enforcement. And I think the problem here is the indicator we are using, because the indicator does not reflect your different integration position in different issues. I mean, it's an aggregated indicator, and the Chapel Hill survey does not contain a specific indicator for your preferences regarding more supranational power or more supranational enforcement. So this is a weakness of this condition. And then for what you said about the difference of soft and committed pro-enforcers, yeah, it is exactly something we found, that the soft pro-enforcers are more often net recipients of EU funding as the new member state, and Ireland is a deviant case in this sense. We need to explain it better, but we included this explanation regarding the euro crisis, because the recovery of Ireland from this euro crisis was quite different from the ones of Portugal, Spain, and Greece, and we think that this may be what explains that Ireland has been more committed and more vocal in the enforcement issue than the cases of Spain, Italy, Portugal, or Greece, because I think these countries are still quite reluctant to surveillance in a broad sense, because they fear to face the negative consequences as they faced during the crisis.
Thank you. Okay, we have a bit of time, and so can I invite members of the audience? There are certainly some very knowledgeable people I see in the participants list. So if you would like to be called upon, just put your hand up. Okay, I see Michael Blauberger. Just, Michael, can you introduce yourself very briefly before asking your question?
Yes, first of all, thanks for that very interesting talk, and also the comments by Daniel. I'm a professor of EU politics in Salzburg, and also very much interested in the issue of rule of law protection. Thanks, Gisela. So I actually have only small questions. So I was hesitating if somebody has big comments. I have more questions. I mean, one is, did I understand correctly that you focus only on Article 7, right? So what you identify the positions with respect to Article 7, and not like, because what I find difficult with Article 7, I mean, you mentioned these many tactical considerations that can emerge in the council. And I mean, knowing that it's very unlikely that a vote will take place might really invite very unclear positions, or also cheap talk on the part of the pro-enforcers. I mean, that refers a bit to what Daniel said. I was surprised that, I mean, partly surprised, partly not, that Germany was classified as a strong, like all governments. I mean, because the German conservatives were among the most important protection for Orban for a very long time, but at the same time, they could pretend to be a strong enforcer in the council, and I that might have to do something with the Article 7 framework, that like knowing it has no costs to, or very little costs to be perceived as a strong enforcer. One other question I have is, who are the governments where you couldn't identify the positions? I mean, is there any pattern? I mean, are they a bit here and there, or are there systematically some countries that don't position themselves at all? And maybe that's also telling, because I mean, to make Article 7 work, you would need many countries becoming very active, right? Did you really, mostly questions, did you try to identify variation between Hungary and between countries taking a position on Article 7 vis-a-vis Hungary and vis-a-vis Poland? I mean, are there countries that would be willing to go forward with Article 7 against Poland, but not against Hungary, or vice versa? And last question, I mean, I guess no, the answer is no, but I would still be interested if, because you said there's a lot of path dependency, but I would be interested if there's any variation over time. I mean, if there could be something like, I mean, if the problem got more severe in Poland, could we see some sort of convergence, or at least a trend towards more tougher stance on Article 7 for that reason? Yeah, so I stop here.
Okay, do you want to take that? I see also Uli Zedelmeier has a question, but maybe since these questions were pretty specific, you could respond quickly to them, and I'll give Uli the floor.
Okay, so thank you very much, Michael, for your questions and your comments. These are very, very useful. First of all, I'm noticing your concerns about the case of Germany. The thing is that for determining the dependent variable, which is to be against or in favor of enforcement, we have not taken into account only the position regarding Article 7, but also the attitudes regarding rule of law enforcement in general. So whether, for example, these governments have proposed new mechanisms of surveillance in the European Union for the rule of law, whether they have moved forward these mechanisms. I think, for example, on the conditionality regulation and these kind of things. And these are the points that we have taken into account in order to determine whether they are strong or soft anti-enforcers. Also, we will have a look again at the case of Germany, but all the stances and all the declarations and actions we found were very much pointing towards that they were strong pro-enforcers. So that's what I said before for the comment of Daniel. Maybe we need to think about including more variance or more complexity to our categorization in degree, because this is also creating me actually a concern about whether we have done this classification in degree well enough or complex or realistic enough. Secondly, for the governments which we have not found evidence, most of them are very short governments in time. For example, I'm thinking particularly on cases in Eastern Europe where, for example, in Romania, we found a lot of very short governments. Like we found from between 2016 and 2021, I think like 8 governments, and we have evidence only for 1 or 2 because they were so short that we couldn't find any declarations or actions regarding the rule of law enforcement. So mostly these are this type of governments for which it has been impossible to find any evidence. Then we have the data for classifying the governments reflects what you have said, that some governments have been more vocal against Hungary than against Poland, but or more supportive, better said, for Hungary than for Poland. In the committed cases, in the committed pro rule of law enforcers, I have not found so much differences. Normally they are equally vocal against both of them, but it is true that in the cases of the anti-enforcer, that there has been more support, if I'm not wrong, normally for Poland than for Hungary, but we have not taken it into account in the analysis because we wanted to only provide a picture of the broad issue of rule of law enforcement, but maybe this is something we can consider to distinguish between support and positions against what is doing by the Hungarian government and by the Polish government. And finally, as for the variation over time, the thing is that I'm not very sure whether we can reflect this, because we were thinking about including the 2022 data for amplifying the observation, but the problem is that as we have had the Ukrainian war, we think that this is a very different case for what we are studying here, because we think that here with the Ukrainian war there has been an instrumentalization of the rule of law thing to move Poland and Hungary to a determined position against or in favor of the sanctions. So we finally decided not to include this data, which is the one in which we could find more variation, particularly in Eastern and new member states, because this explanation was difficult to justify in the QCA. So I'm not sure whether we could add it or how to do it, probably. But I agree with you that I perceive that there is going to be probably a tendency in the following years among the new member states to be more in this category of soft pro-enforcers, particularly I thinking about the Baltics, for example. But this is the reason why it is not reflected in the current state of the paper.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
thanks. So Uli, you have the floor. Please introduce yourself briefly.
Hi, Uli Sedelmeier. I'm an associate professor in international relations at the London School of Economics. And first of all, I have to apologize. I had to join half an hour late, so it might well be that I'm now asking stupid questions that you answered at the very beginning. But I just also want to say I find the paper really fascinating, and I think it's great work that you're doing here. I think it's very ambitious and really necessary to try to get more to the government positions and the difference in those. So I think it's really good work that you're doing, and very sympathetic also to the theoretical framework that you're using. The question that I wanted to ask, and some of that has been preempted by Michael's questions, but if I understand correctly, you start collecting your data on the positions only from 2016 onwards, and I just wonder, and it goes a little bit into the direction of the point that Michael made about cases where you have non-statements or where you have no data, because in principle you could say you should be starting in 2010, when Fidesz gets elected and changes the constitution. So the fact that you don't actually look at it at all, and I think the reason why you might not include anything before 2016 is because there isn't much, but it's precisely the point. But what does it mean if governments don't actually take a position? And that might then also feed to a broader point that I think in different ways have been made before, and I think you've partly already answered it. But I think that there is a kind of a tricky issue with regard to what do you really take, or what do you take as a kind of a genuine expression of a government's preference? Because I think unless it's about your preferences on a mechanism, which is still in principle neutral, because you're not saying I'm taking a position against the Hungarian government or against the Polish government, and unless it comes to an actual vote, where you have to take a position, I think governments, as Michael said, as long as it's not clear that it's going to lead anywhere, governments will always be reluctant to take an explicit position against another member state government. They don't want to alienate them. Now, of course, and I think you already hinted at it, and Daniel touched on it as well, so that, what governments might be more concerned that they're sending signals to domestic voters, and in that sense, they might be prepared to take into account the costs of aggravating or alienating other governments. But I just wonder whether you might need to distinguish also a little bit about the kind of issues that you count with regard to your dependent variable, whether it's with regard, whether it's an explicit position about Hungary or Poland, or whether it's more sort of neutrally maybe about strengthening the EU's instruments, which is not as antagonistic, if you want, and maybe to distinguish between those. And I realize that obviously that also decreases the number of your observations, but I was just wondering if that's something you've thought about. But again, the bottom line is I'm very sympathetic to what you're doing, and I think it's great that you're doing it, and I think you're doing a very good job in sort of working with the material that is out there. So don't want to kind of my queries get into the way of praising what you're doing and encouraging you in doing it.
So thank you very much, Ulrich, for your comments. These are very, very useful, of course. Actually, we started to, at the beginning, when we started to construct the dependent variable, we took into account governments from 2010. The problem is that we've had, as you said, we had a very large number of governments for which we don't have any evidence. And I'm not very sure how we can interpret this. Our first interpretation we made was that even though Fidesz was in the Hungarian government, the rule of law issue has not gained at that point in time very much relevance in the European Union agenda. So that's why governments didn't found themselves pushed towards adopting a position on this concrete matter. So that's the reason why we decided to put the starting point on 2016, also because it is in 2015 when the Polish government, the Law and Justice Party entered the Polish government. So it also permits us to not to do what Michael previously pointed out, to distinguish between actions against Hungary and actions against Poland. But I think we need to definitely better justify this in the paper, this rationality and how we decided to take the starting point at 1 year and not another. And also, what do we take as a genuine preference, as an indicator for preference? We have a methodological annex for explaining how we have interpreted the data we have for the dependent variable. There is a number of requirements for saying it in a way in order for you to be classified into for a government to be classified into one of the 4 categories. The problem is that I agree with you. The evidence for some governments is very strong. We have like pages of evidence, but for others it's not so clear. It is we have had done this classification following the indicators, but it has been complicated sometimes. The thing is that we cannot discard a lot of more of governments, because then for us it's very difficult to explain, okay, how our results are relevant or how they are really explanatory if we have left in the way too much government. So this is a delicate balance in which I think we need to work more. A possible solution may be to test our dependent variable with an expert, like doing an expert survey, and then through Krippendorf alpha or something like that, say how consistent is our interpretation, how consistent is our interpretation of these genuine preferences. But it is something we have not had the opportunity to do yet. So thank you very much for all your comments.
Thanks. Is there anybody else who would like to pose a question? I don't see any other hands. If not, I do have one further question. I mean, it seems to me that one of the results you're coming up with is that the ideological stance of governments basically matters in contexts where the far right is either in government or is supporting the government. And so then the question, I mean, it's clear you have some good examples of that. Austria, first Kurz government, the Lega five-star government in Italy, and it could now be the case in Sweden and Italy again. The question is, are there other examples where the far right is either in government or supporting government where you don't see that effect? And one example that comes to mind perhaps would be Denmark, where the Danish People's Party was for, I think in the period you're looking at, had a similar position to the Sweden Democrats in the right now. And I wonder if there are other such cases. It's outside your period, but in the Netherlands between 2010 and 2012, Geert Wilders, People's Party was also in the position of supporting the government from outside, but maybe it didn't come up because that was not a period when the rule of law conflict was so salient. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, actually, for example, as I mentioned in the analysis, that Finland one was a deviant case because the government didn't fit our solution because it presented a very high score in the TAN ideological measurement. And I think that this may be a similar case to the ones you are pointing out, a government with a lot of a high score in the TAN ideological axis, but which on the other hand is in favor of this rule of law enforcement. And the explanation that comes to my mind has to do with which I think Daniel said before, or I didn't remember if it was Daniel or Michael, but the idea that maybe these governments, even though the ideological sign change, prefer to continue with this policy of being pro-enforcers because they can send this position to their electorate. I mean, as net contributors of the EU budget, as governments that are worried about the discipline in the European Union and how their money are used, they may prefer to keep on this policy of surveillance or monitoring the rest of the member states in order to gain their voters at home. But of course, this is just speculation. I'm not very sure how we could test this. As for the case of Austria, as I said before, it is I think more explained, apart from the fact that the far right was in the government, for the fact of the migration crisis at that point, because data shows that Hungary and Austria were very, very close partners in that specific issue. And as I said, for example, with the Ukraine war, I think that in this case, there was a subordination of the rule of law issue to a priority issue that at the moment was the migration crisis. So these are the explanations that come to my mind in this regard.
Okay, thank you. I think it'll be important to try to work that out because it probably is one of the contributions of your analysis, and to be able to specify when does it matter that you have a far right party in your influence in government would be important. Okay, so I don't see any other hands. I think it just remains to thank you, to thank Daniel, to thank the other participants, and just to remind people that we will have our next seminar on the 17th of November. The speaker will be Stefania Panebianco, who has also recently joined the steering committee of the standing group. She's from the University of Catania. She'll be presenting on mobility, immobility in the Mediterranean, challenges to Euro-Mediterranean cooperation via mobility partnerships, and her discussant will be Michelle Pace from Roskilde University. So it'll be the same time. We'll go back to our normal slot, which is the third Thursday of each month, and we hope to see you and perhaps some of your colleagues and students there. Thanks a lot, everybody.